Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks, Chair. Let me start by thanking the organizers of this conference for inviting me to be a speaker here. In particular, I want to thank Zenzele Ndebele for specifically inviting me and giving me some few words of advice in terms of who I'd be addressing. He did say that the majority of participants at this conference, which is the first time I'm attending, would be journalism students and a sprinkling of practicing journalists. So my presentation today is largely aimed at them. My presentation seeks to explain the existential financial crisis, which is affecting virtually all media organizations across the world, except for a few, such as the Financial Times of London, the New York Times, and a couple of others. But otherwise, most news organizations are facing really a financial meltdown. I look at their crisis from a business management perspective. So I'm using the lenses from business management to try and make sense of this. I purposefully focus. So it looks like the internet is not okay this side, but I purposefully focus on newspapers and their journalism in tracing this crisis. It's because newspapers were the first to do journalism many centuries ago, as I'll be indicating. And because of the dominance that these newspapers have had on the journalism profession. But before I take you on this journey, take a look at this. This is an exaggerated depiction which I am putting across to you of what might happen, possibly in 5 years' time, who knows, if we have to believe the proponents of artificial intelligence, especially if we are heavily reliant on it. It's food for thought. But let me begin now to take you on this journey of what happened, why it happened, when it happened, why media institutions and their journalism are facing a serious financial crisis. Alison Shontel, the editor-in-chief of the New York-based Fortune magazine, spoke in August in an interview about how, when she was appointed editor in 2021, she found Fortune, as you know, is a well-known, global magazine published in New York. She spoke of it being in the dark ages. She said she had to drag it to embrace digitalization. And then she had this to say. For readers today, you as media organizations, and you could include even journalists there as well, need to be wherever they are, however they want to consume information, whether that is a TikTok video or it is in LinkedIn or it is in your email inbox. Rupert Murdoch, who owns a global media empire that spans television stations and newspapers in Australia, the UK, and the US, and retired a little over a week ago as chairman of this empire, had this to say about the future of newspapers in the digital age when he spoke to American editors on 13th April 2005. I quote, this is what he said. As an industry, many of us have been remarkably and unaccountably complacent. Newspapers whose employees, and you could read here journalists, look down on their readers can have no hope of ever succeeding as a business. In the digital age, our success will still depend on the bond of trust between readers and our content. If we earn that trust and the loyalty of our readers, good newspapers and their electronic siblings will become even stronger brands. The sentiments of Chantal and Murdoch nicely encapsulate the huge challenges and opportunities of media and journalists who are operating in today's highly disrupted media landscape. The landscape has been disrupted by the advent of the internet first, then followed by digital and social media, and now by artificial intelligence. This disruption challenges the role of the news media as a bulwark of democracy. That has been the role of media, which we have known for ages. The key issue then and now is how can media and their journalists ensure that they are using appropriate digital and social media platforms where their audiences have migrated to following the digital and social media revolution that has taken hold of the world more than 2 decades ago. Crucially, as media seek to better serve their audiences and simultaneously to be financially sustainable, one has to ask whether their news content is still relevant to audiences' news wants and needs. The media landscape, which today could be described as an ocean of news and information, which is challenging the attention spans of human beings, was not always this way. To understand what is going on today in the media landscape, we need to go back in history to find out what really happened, when, and why. For more than 6 centuries, newspapers, which were the first media platforms to do journalism in the world, operated in an environment of what I call information scarcity. There were fewer newspapers than now. There was less news and information available to audiences and advertisers. There was less choice, and audiences and advertisers found it costly to access media products and services. It's perhaps important for me to note here that advertisers have been and continue to be the main funders of not only newspapers, but of media organizations across the world. According to Robert Pickard, one of the most preeminent scholars of media management in the world, this is what he had to say. He said, in the last 50 years of the 20th century, newspapers netted what he called super profits. He said their average return on investment, ROI, was between 15 and 20% versus 9% in the pharmaceutical industry, 7 to 8% in the metal sector, 6% in the aircraft sector, 2 to 4% being made by car manufacturers, 4% for departmental stores, and 2 to 3% for supermarkets. In other words, newspapers were minting money. However, as newspapers prospered phenomenally, making individual owners such as Rupert Murdoch, who I referred to a little while ago, making them super rich and powerful, They increasingly became unresponsive to the news needs and wants of their main stakeholders, their audiences and advertisers. The unwritten maxim at the time was that media freedom was guaranteed only to those who owned a press. Their business model was based on selling eyeballs, that is the newspaper circulation and readership, and the audience ratings, which measure the people who listen or watch broadcast stations. Because the newspapers were monopolies, they frequently raised their advertising rates and cover prices, paying little regard about whether audiences and advertisers could afford these. So when the internet arrived in the 1970s, most newspapers and radio and television stations dismissed the new technology as a passing fad. Newspapers in particular made the point that they had, after all, survived the competition for audiences and advertisers from both radio and TV stations. They couldn't pay much attention to the internet. Only a few newspaper owners saw the internet as an opportunity to implement a new business model. Then newspapers, without any strategic thought at all, willy-nilly uploaded their news content on the internet without knowing how to monetize it. In fact, their internet editions ironically began to compete with their hard copy editions, which was their main cash cow. They became what Danny Miller, they became victims of what is known as the Icarus paradox, according to Danny Miller, where phenomenal success over time breeds failure. Stated differently, the more successful you become as an organization, the greater the danger of you failing because of complacency. Aside from the newspaper's failure to monetize the internet editions, it was clear that the newspapers and radio and television stations did not fully grasp the emerging nuanced business model of their changing media landscape. Newspapers and all news media are not just selling news and information. They are in what is called the influence business. They use their credibility and reputation to influence society on key societal matters, such as how people make life choices, like on democracy, their health, the products and services which they buy. This is what they are selling, not news and information per se. You'll notice here, I've quoted somebody who is called Philip Meyer, who in a landmark paper which he produced in 2004, made this articulation. That's what he said. His news influence model says quality news, which is largely defined by audiences because of the value and utility of gratifications that audiences get from news. It increases societal and commercial influence. First, it gives you societal influence, which is not for sale, and commercial influence, which is for sale. Both of these drive up higher circulations and audience ratings, which in turn drive up the number of advertisers who could come to advertise on your media firm. Such advertisers, if they are happy, tend to pay a premium for advertising on your newspaper or on your media. Part of the high income that you earn as a media organization must be reinvested in improving the quality of news in a continuing virtuous cycle. As Meyer himself put it, and I quote here, a news medium's societal influence enhances its commercial influence. An influential newspaper will have more readers, be more trusted by those readers, and be worth more to advertisers. Diagrammatically, this is how Meyer's news influence model looks like. I've modified it slightly myself. What it says, as you see there, high quality and credible news content gives you audiences. And here I must also explain that advertisers would prefer audiences who have disposable incomes. So if you have got a high number of audiences who have disposable incomes, this attracts premium advertisers. These advertisers who are prepared to pay a premium to advertise on your publication, on your radio station or TV station. Indeed, simultaneously, other organizations and other businesses may want to associate themselves, if you're a credible news organization, they may want to form partnerships mutually beneficial to both. So as you can see here in this virtuous cycle, then the news organization will be able to be profitable. But the critical thing is that part of those profits must be reinvested in improving quality content. The arrival of the internet was followed by the launch of online search companies such as Yahoo, which some of you probably still remember. It was the first search engine to be launched, although it has fallen behind Google, for example, because it wasn't properly led. And there are lots of stories by people who used to work at Yahoo who were decrying the way it was led by people who were always closeted in silos and so on. And of course, Google. These were later to be followed by digital platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., etc. What was happening here, we're having the ushering in of the economics of abundance in the creation, distribution, and consumption of news and information. So you can see we've moved from the economics of scarcity in information. Now the digital revolution brings us the economics of information abundance. As when the internet arrived, mainstream news media institutions and their journalists held back from using these platforms, and in most cases continued to operate as if it was business as usual. But it wasn't, as we all. But what has been the cost of the failure of the news media broadly to embrace these new technological changes? I'll give a snapshot of what has happened. Obviously, the picture is much more complex than this. Tens of thousands of media jobs have been lost globally. Examples include 1,611 jobs lost in the US in 1990, 1,387 jobs lost in 2009. In 2008 alone, 16,000 jobs were lost in the US. In the UK, More than 5,000 media jobs disappeared in the decade up to 2014. Statistics of job losses in the media in Africa are patchy, partly because of the difficulties of finding accurate information in Africa. Media owners do not want to part with this information, which they hold so close to their hearts, like state secrets. But in South Africa alone, 5,000 media jobs were lost in the past decade, or half of the total number of editorial jobs in South African newsrooms. But there were other impacts as well on journalism as the digital revolution took hold of the media landscape. One, there was increased deprofessionalization of journalism. In other words, anyone could claim and do journalism work. And simultaneously, there was greater professionalization of journalism. In other words, there was greater scrutiny of journalistic work from ordinary people, who we now call the fifth estate. You will recall that the media generally is known as the fourth estate, after the three arms of government. There was also increased news noise at this time. That is, disinformation, misinformation, and fake news began to proliferate largely from certain sections of social media. These result in the decline of the value, utility, truthfulness, and relevance of journalism to society. Simultaneously, in the so-called post-truth world in which we now live in, what I mean here maybe is to explain that there are people today who want to create their own truth, people such as Donald Trump, who want to create their own realities and try to sell this to you and me. So simultaneously in the so-called post-truth world, we have had the rise of social influencers, especially in the marketing industry. They are marketing goods and services. And then we had this health pandemic of COVID-19, which struck nations in 2020. It forced the closure of so many companies across the world. Don't forget, these are the companies who are advertisers. It accelerated the financial and economic crisis of journalism and of newspapers in particular. Silverman described COVID-19 as a media extinction event. And Carter began to chronicle what he saw as the emergence of what he called news deserts in many parts of the world. In other words, many parts of the world in the aftermath of COVID in particular did no longer had newspapers, especially small local newspapers serving communities. They closed. They couldn't make it anymore because of the financial crisis. About this time, although this started a little bit earlier, we began to have what were known as digital first or digital only media emerging more significantly in this time. Site is an example of these media operations which have been established across the world. But the business model of these digital media operations and of legacy media generally, legacy media here referring to newspapers, radio and television stations, is still under greater scrutiny because more media houses are folding and more journalists are being retrenched. The advertising supported business model clearly no longer works because advertisers pay much less in terms of dollars and cents in the vast online and digital spaces which we have today, because space there is unlimited compared to the limited space and time of legacy media. The key question that emerges is, if these digital-first media operations cannot sustain journalism, here I want to give an example of an American digital-first media operation, which was well known. It was initially seen as succeeding. It was called BuzzFeed. It had to close earlier this year. It retrenched virtually all its journalists. In the face of all of this, especially then, what should be done? New business models have emerged that seek to monetize audiences. Remember, we are coming from a state where media was largely dependent on advertisers. But now the new business models that have emerged in the aftermath of a deepening financial crisis, they've included, how do we monetize audiences? How do we get money from audiences who are reading us, who are listening to us, etc., etc.? So that's where you have had the paywalls being erected by media, especially the print media. They are forcing you to pay money in order to consume their content. Of course, they are both hard and soft or freemium paywalls. The hard ones, like that of Wall Street Journal in New York, you cannot read any of their content unless you pay. And then we have freemiums, whereby the media organizations such as the New York Times, it gives you a certain number of stories which you get for free. Once you reach the maximum, you must pay. Other models have prominanced them or prioritized even the monetization of what is known as native advertising. This is when a company or an organization wants to say whatever it wants to say. You allow them to do that. They write whatever they want. Then they put it across in your media organization. They pay for it. Of course, we've had the establishment of blogs, some of which are being monetized, of newsletters, which Mr. Ndebele, you'd have heard him talk about. Newsletters, which are aiding it first to get the readers, to get advertising, etc., and so on. Podcasts, including videocasts in the clicks economy. In this environment, there is a need for new media audience relationships that need to be formed, and new metrics to measure audiences' media consumption and engagement. I listened yesterday to the Daily Maverick presentation, and that was a very good presentation telling us how the Daily Maverick is trying to ensure that as an organization, they address their audience's news needs and wants, and they are ensuring that there's greater engagement, true, honest engagement with their readers. I want to add something which we had last month during a meeting of One IFRA, their digital conference, which took place 13, 14 September. Google officials who attended this conference told us that Google is now collaborating with specific media. In fact, the Daily Maverick is one of them. I hope I'm not disclosing secrets here. In South Africa, in Kenya, and Nigeria, they are launching what they call Rich Communication Services, RCS. which seeks to exploit the power and convenience of smart mobile phones. In their beta versions, they are being tested. That's what is going on. News stories are being run as conversational modules, not as properly formatted stories that we've been accustomed to over the years, according to these Google officials. Diagrammatically, this is what RCS looks like. From the news organization producing the content, it goes to a news agent, which is like moderating this news content, communicates with the audience. By the way, communicating with an individual member of the audience, not just in broad terms, communicating with, that's where we've got specific or personalization of news. And then you have to pay potentially using a credit card, obviously, which will be a challenge, especially for Africa, where not many people are using credit cards. But essentially, from what the Google officials were telling this conference, you'd have this news agent, for example, saying, you want a story, it was, this modularized way of telling, stories in a conversational way. The news agent might just say, good morning, Mr. X, etc. What can we do for you today? And the news agent would give you a list of stories available on that day and say, what would you want from this menu? And you'd get whatever you choose. And, it will be communicating to you like, let's say you want to know about a military coup which has taken place maybe in Algeria, just an example. Then the consumer might ask, could you give me a background of previous military coups in Algeria? And it would do so, etc., etc. So that's what they're experimenting with now, Google, with a couple of these media organizations. So what are we having now? We're having the widening uptake of artificial intelligence tools. But it's important for us to contextually understand what has been going on. AI has been in existence for more than 2 decades and has been used by some media, especially in the US, to break news on things such as earthquakes, to report on results of sports events, on results of the financials of companies, etc. That's what has been going on for many years now. Now, generative AI chatbots have been launched. I think we've heard quite a lot about this during this conference. These bots have capabilities to generate, as we have had, text, graphics, photos, and to engage in conversations, etc. I think I'm not exaggerating here if I were to say the biggest story of 2023 has been that of ChatGPT, which is owned by a company known as OpenAI, is based in the US. It's led by somebody as their CEO called Sam Altman. But there are other chatbots. Bard, for example, was launched by Google a little while ago. And Google is working on launching before the end of this year another chatbot called Gemini or Gemini, depending how you pronounce it. As you know, Microsoft has Bing, a chatbot called Bing. And a host of other chatbots, which are either have been launched or they will be launched shortly, such as Perplexity, Claude 2, ChatSonic, Jasper Chat, etc., etc. ChatGPT-4, which I depicted at the beginning of my presentation, was launched in March 2023, after its predecessor, ChatGPT 3.5, was unveiled in November of 2022. It's been the subject of great interest among businesses, media, and journalists and scholars. I think we've heard this enough. As you prompt it, it can write an academic essay, which is a problem for those who teach students at various academic institutions. It can write a job application for you and make you look good, which is a problem for those who assess the potential of applicants for jobs, because then it's not really depicting who you are, but the tool is trying to make you look better. It can write a new story if you prompt it, etc. But I was glad that, for example, at SITE, their human journalists are still doing the bulk of the work and not letting AI begin to do the work for them. In other words, these chatbots are making work much easier. They are promoting efficiency, productivity, and creativity for task-focused or related work. I think we had Charlie Beckett speaking to us earlier this week, and he was making these points. Businesses see these chatbots as a game changer in lifting their productivity and adding new technology-focused jobs. But simultaneously, there are challenges. These include who owns, for example, the work that is written by AI. We have heard about the biases of misinformation, which in the case of ChatGPT, really until about 2 or so weeks ago, was limited to information up to September 2021. There are concerns about these chatbots on your personal information, which they have. Is it secure? Is it safe? And your security. We have a situation where these bots can track you, even if you have switched them off or you have elected not to have them. They can track you to know where you are at any given time. And these are serious security implications. Really. You've heard already about the plagiarism concerns for academics and information which they do not have in their memory, creating what are known as hallucinations. It's like they're dreaming. You have also heard there are widespread fears that they might lead to job loss. For journalism, the key concern is on trust, which really is the overarching anchor of all democratic journalism. Some members of the public fear that information, receive fake news in an environment where already information and causing problems for society. Several analysts around the world, including Elon Musk, I think all of us know who Elon Musk now is, they are calling on governments to regulate AI to ensure that it is safe for users and that it protects the privacy of individuals, of businesses, and of governments themselves. For journalists, there is now a need, if we are going to be using AI, such as what Site is doing, to come up with new journalistic codes of conduct, how your journalists use AI, the do's and the don'ts. I'll give an example here. Associated Press is an American press agency, and the New York Times already have come up with their own journalistic policies and guidelines on how their journalists should use AI. Despite these controversies I've touched on here, what is clear is that an AI revolution is taking place. I underline that. An AI revolution is taking place. There are several big platform companies, such as Amazon, Apple, and Meta, who are joining OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft to launch their own chatbots. Businesses are also launching their own chatbots that are customized to do work for their own specific operations. I'll give an example. Naspers, a newspaper or a media group in South Africa, which owns newspapers and also MultiChoice, which, broadcast sports and all sorts of, things. Some of you might know it as Mnet, DSTV, etc. They've got their own chat bot called +One. It's already operational. How AI-dominated journalism will look like, say, in 2060, is anyone's guess. But some in my older generation, we, the so-called digital immigrants, I'm quoting Murdoch here when he spoke at that meeting with American editors. He called people of my generation and his generation digital immigrants. So we are concerned about the quality and the standards of journalism that is to come. I don't know about you. In closing, let us not forget historian Melvin Krasbeck's 1986 first law on technology. Paraphrased, it says, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. This means that we as journalists, members of the public, and other key stakeholders who are concerned about democracy and our well-being generally, we need to pay attention to how these chatbots and other emerging technologies are being developed, by whom and for what purposes. We need to voice our concerns, for example, on issues of privacy of individuals in the age of AI, and seek to have these addressed by the developers of these technologies, lest these technologies will begin to control our lives instead of us controlling their use and functions. I'm about to end here, but I just want to note here that I did research and write this presentation myself without the aid of an AI chatbot, except maybe the diagram on my first slide, which I obtained from the internet. Before I just conclude, there's a short video which I've asked the site technicians to share with you, which I think nicely summarizes what I was trying to say here today. I thank you. Maybe I should just explain that this video shows someone called Imran Chowdhury, who worked for Apple for 22 years, working with Steve Jobs to design computers. You remember their iPod, the famous iPod, their Apple phones, their Apple Watch now. He speaks about what they are working on, which they will unveil shortly. These are screenless, seamless, sensing technologies dependent on AI, which could redefine how we live and work in the age of AI. Thank you.
So I am wondering, looking at our current newsroom, particularly our mainstream newsrooms, they are dominated, I mean those that are occupying a decision-making position, they are dominated by people of almost his age. He was talking about digital immigrants. So in his view, the presence of such people in high up in decision-making positions, how I'm trying to see how I can frame it properly. How is that perhaps a hindrance in ensuring that the newsrooms, they really embrace and take use of these AI to ensure that newsrooms are fit for the current environment that is so into AI?
Okay, thank you so much, Bheki Zulu. Please take us back to Dr. Mdlongwa so that he responds to the question.
Thanks very much. Yes, that's a pertinent question, mainly because most media organizations, as the speaker is pointing out, are still led by, old people, the people who, as I indicated earlier, Alison Chantel was referring to, even at a leading global magazine such as Fortune. She spoke of, the Fortune, being in the dark age, and she had to drag it out from there. I mean, it is a big challenge. What can we do? Well, I think, the story of transformation of the media landscape is an ongoing story. So I think the editors, these digital immigrants like me, must teach themselves. It's a constant learning, never ending, in fact, lifelong, learning, to be able to understand a rapidly changing media landscape so that they can be part of it. Because if they are not part of it, they will be left behind. In other words, they'll become irrelevant. Indeed, if they do not want to transform or lead transformation in their own news organizations, those organizations will become irrelevant. They'll close. We've seen lots of media companies closing in the aftermath, not just of the digital revolution. We'll see more as the AI revolution spreads. So that is one potential situation which we can see developing. But I think, on the other hand, it's important too that people such as the questioner, who I noticed is fairly young, really try to ensure that they make their newsrooms to appreciate the need for change. They could lead, changes within their own newsrooms. I know it's not simple to do that, especially if you are just a reporter. But I think if, most of the reporters were to, come together, approach their editors, who you described as digital immigrants, to say, these are our concerns based on ABC. We really need to embrace this type of change. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. So I think if this was done, maybe there would be some kind of a progress. You could nudge them to begin to appreciate the need for change. These are difficult change issues. Change management is a painful exercise. So I'm afraid there are no easy answers to give. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mdlongwa, for responding to that questions. Any more questions from the floor? All right, seems like we do not have any more questions. Well, thank you so much to our presenters of this session and all the questions and comments as well. But yeah, for now, we'll take a break. It's 12:20 and we'll be back at 1:25.
Thank you.
The conference is ongoing. Remember, the future of journalism education in Southern Africa. And the theme of the conference is empowering African AI, enhancing journalism excellence in the digital era. And the conference is brought to you by... Okay, I understand there is one more question. Please don't go away, Dr. Francis Mdlongwa, while we fetch that question for you. And I was saying this conference is brought to you by the Namibia Media Trust, NMT, as well as MISA Malawi, Media Institute of Southern Africa, Malawi, together with Site Center for Innovation and Technology and DW Academy. And this is a 3-day conference. It's a hybrid conference. That means that some are attending physically, some are also attending virtually as we move. Remember yesterday, it was in Namibia. That's where, okay. So now-
Is it possible that I can ask the question? I have a question to Dr.
Okay.
Hello? Okay, in fact, my name is Edward Kwacha. I'm from Malawi. I work with a media institution called Umuntu FM. I was very delighted on the way how you presented your presentation, Doc. But towards the end, you talked about the technology. It's like you ending up with some sort of like wanting to ask the journalists that much as we are advancing the AI, the artificial ensure the technologies, but we are supposed to be very, very, very careful, because somehow we may not actually presume that they're good or they're bad or else they're neutral. So I just wanted to find out from you, why are you actually having that particular cautious that we are supposed also to be very, very much cautious as much as we're advancing the usage of the technologies, but still more as journalists, either in the newsroom or in another field of journalism, we are supposed to be very, very, very much cautious. So I just wanted to find out from you, Doc, why are we ending up in such particular scenario that we need to be a little bit cautious? Thank you.
Thank you. I finally been unmuted here. Thanks a lot to the questioner. What I'm trying to signal there is to say that while news media organizations should not be left behind to embrace or to study and see whether they can embrace the new technology of AI, they should simultaneously be checking it you need to be reading up. There's so much news about AI. I mean, it is mind-boggling, the amount of news which you get about the developments of AI on a daily basis. It's just mind-boggling. You need to keep abreast of what is happening in the field, what is being done, so that you can have an input, into what is going on as media professionals, so that your interests are taken into account when these developers continue to develop, these AI chatbots. If you do not have your input taken into account because you are silent or you don't know, unfortunately, the revolution will go on without you. And that really is the critical point. And that's what I was trying to signal there. Thank you.